What's up, everybody, and thanks for tuning in to another video. I'm Rich Wilson, founder and filmmaker of Vibe Media, where we help your brand build to an influencer level online presence using filmmaking tools and tips to tell your story. Now today we talk cult classics. What are they? How do we define a cult classic? And we also talk about some of our favorite cult classic movies. So go ahead, take a listen, and on with the episode. Hey everybody, welcome to Vibe Check, the podcast for filmmakers like you and film enthusiasts also like you. And today we are talking cult classics. I'm Rich Wilson, founder and director of Vibe Media. We've got Dana, we've got Forrest. We're here, we're ready to talk about cult classics.
I brought this topic up. I was definitely just thinking about different movies, and I think we started having a conversation on this, and I was like, wait, this is perfect for a podcast. Let's hold off.
Yes.
Let's do this.
And we have.
I think before we jump into this, because we've started talking a little bit, and then we had some different ideas, we would have to first define what a cult classic is.
Yeah, so what is a cult classic? Dana, what do you define as a cult classic?
For me, I would say it's something that's got kind of like a cult following to it. Like it's a very small audience that it reaches, like Mandy, like our last movie that we watched. That's definitely a cult classic movie, even though it's not like 10 plus years old. I know there's like a specific definition for it, but I'd say movies that are just very... They didn't do so well in box offices, but they've done well later on down the road. Like now, like... For instance, like the Resident Evil movies. I would consider the first one, just the first one, a cult classic because now they've got like Netflix series coming out based off of the first movie. And they've, that was like the closest one to the actual video game, in my opinion, too, because they went through the mansion and the red dress and all that stuff.
Okay.
So, yeah, for me, a cult classic is something that is small and didn't really pick up traction until later on.
Okay, so you would define it as like, a small audience.
Mm-hmm. Like a small demographic that it
small
reaches.
demographic that are reached and it just blew up later on. Okay.
Like The Room.
Interesting. Ooh, yeah. And
I think when we were discussing this initially, I was looking up kind of the definition, and there are two kind of different varying definitions. There is the definition that Dana's talking about, which is more what they call the exclusive viewpoint. Which essentially is saying that if it is a big budget movie, anything of that nature, that it wouldn't be included in a cult classic, that it does have to have that smaller following. I think I'm more of the inclusive or just kind of all-encompassing definition, to where as long as it's had a societal impact on people in a mass format, then it would be a cult classic.
interesting.
I think the biggest kind of example you can always give is things like Mean Girls, huge blockbuster hit. People quote it all the time. Rocky Horror Picture Show at this point, it wasn't really, I guess, a big budget at the time, but at this point has grown to be, everybody knows Rocky Horror Picture Show, to the fact that they just redid it on Fox a couple years ago when they were doing the live reenactments. And,
right, yeah.
So I don't think it necessarily has to be just a small audience for it. I think it is something that can reach the mass appeal, but as long as it's influenced culture.
Okay. So we've got two similar but yet very different, but very different viewpoints on this. So I don't know. I guess I'll be the referee on some of these. So cult classics. What are some? What are not? So you said Resident Evil.
Well, I say that purely just based on the fact that it doesn't have a huge fan base, and it's the people who do love it are so hardcore for it. Like they live stream on Twitch, like playing the video games, where they'll like do like the Mystery Space 3000 thing and talk about the movie while it's playing. Like,
right.
They go hard.
And I think for me, when we were talking about that, it was hard for me to consider that a cult classic, not only because it is a full series at this point, but it almost branches more on the geekdom or the nerddom fandom of it versus a cult fandom. I think there's a difference between it just being a big thing for this small group of people versus it being a big thing for everybody, regardless of if you are just somebody who follows Resident Evil games and stuff. So for me, that's where I start talking about those bigger ones that regardless if you're a fan of Mean Girls or not, you hear people talk about Mean Girls. You know
Yeah.
that we wear what color on Wednesdays?
Pink.
Pink. So it's literally
And-
like everybody
Yes.
knows that.
See, for me, I differentiate on thinking Mean Girls is a cult classic. For me, that's nostalgia because I was like 8 when that movie came out.
And that was geared
And
towards
yeah,
your...
and that was geared towards girls.
Yeah,
So it's like
sure.
I grew up watching that movie. All of my friends knew it throughout middle school, high school. Everyone knew it. So for me, it wasn't like, oh, like I hate Mean Girls and it's like an exclusive like fan base or following. It's like everyone just kind of knows it and understands it. And your boy, it's okay.
But I guess it doesn't have to be just one or the other, though.
Yeah.
Nostalgic movies can also be cult classics. It
Yeah,
depends.
oh,
It's only
absolutely.
nostalgic to the people who grew up with it, though.
Yeah,
Like Mean Girls
exactly.
is nostalgic to you.
It's a generational thing.
But it's a cult classic to somebody else and vice
like
versa.
you.
Yeah.
Because you're old.
Yeah. Yeah. Just turned 30 not so long ago. I know.
We're
I'm an
not
old
that
man.
much older than you are.
Mentally.
Hey guys, I got
you
at
know.
least 8 years on you,
Yeah,
okay?
so
We talked about this.
Sure,
I watch Jeopardy every day.
Oh.
R.I.P.
Never once seen an
Alex
episode of
Trebek.
Jeopardy,
Alex
but
Trebek.
R.I.P.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though that was
absolutely.
months ago.
But what I did, I brought a couple of movies that I knew that I had in my collection.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
some of them would kind of fit in both categories for nostalgia, which I do think is kind of another topic we can touch on for sure. But some that
Biggest one,
we don't
obviously.
know. Yeah, like Rocky Horror Picture Show. The biggest example of a cult classic right there.
Probably. Would you consider that to be like the first? Possibly. Like
No.
in mainstream.
No.
No. I don't
Okay.
think so. I think it is probably the fastest growing one that was
Okay,
there
yeah.
as an example.
Yeah, I think it's the most prominent.
Because
Yeah.
it's gone
When did
to
this
the
come
fact
out?
that they
When did this
still
come out?
do midnight showings of
Right.
Rocky Horror Picture Show with actual like live actors in front of the screen, or as you're watching the movie, there's things that only fans of the cult following would know. For instance, when they say Janet's name, you would say slut, or when you say this, it's, you yell at the screen, great Scott, and everybody throws toilet paper. Those are things that you wouldn't know unless you followed the movie
Sure.
and unless you were part of this
Right.
following. But again, it's reached this level where they still have it literally to this day. They have midnight showings of Rocky Horror Picture Show. So I think that's a great example of something that's still continued to be a cult following.
Yeah, and I feel like it jumps around to a lot of different genres too, because you look at like, I mean, I know once again we're getting into another series of movies, but Friday the 13th, I would say that's definitely a cult classic just because it wasn't
Like the
big.
original.
Yeah, like
Right.
the very first original one, because it just wasn't big when it first came out. It wasn't like well received, and now it's like they played at movie theaters around at like every Halloween, and same with the actual Halloween movie itself. Like these are movies that I feel like had kind of a lower budget, and they ended up just kind of holding on to like the culture, like you were saying, throughout decades.
And for me, though, I think it's a little harder for me to categorize that because I think horror in general, like slasher films and horror and all that stuff, just has a following itself.
Oh yeah.
So I think regardless if it was Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street or all these things, those are considered, that's where it branches back into that nerdom or that fandom because they're a fan of the genre in general,
I
not
guess-
necessarily the movie itself in general.
I don't know though, because I know a lot of people who prefer Friday the 13th over Halloween. Not everyone likes Halloween and not everyone likes Friday the 13th. I feel like it's really hard to just kind of say it's not this because it belongs to this specific group of people, because that's not really how it is at the end of the day. It's kind of for everyone, really. It just
Right.
seems a little bit more
For a
well-known.
certain amount of people.
Yeah, in like the horror fan base.
Yeah.
But in general, I would consider it, like as someone who's not a part of that fandom, as a cult classic for me.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. So, and we've got plenty to choose from, and kind of hearing both sides. I'm going to throw this out there. Would Star Wars?
I knew you were going to say this.
Would Star Wars be considered a cult classic?
It depends which one.
The original,
Yes,
obviously.
because
the original.
Based on my opinion that it just didn't really do super well when it first initially came out, and then like obviously it wasn't like years later, but
Yeah, it came out in 1977. It was definitely groundbreaking for a lot of films and filmmaking and whatnot. But
it's created a cult
well,
following.
True, and again, even to this day, you have a small number of people who really, really follow it, where you have conventions, you have Star Wars, celebration. You've got the 501st Legion of super fans that dress up in their Star Wars, cosplay and etc. So would Star Wars be considered a, you let us know. Let us know if you consider Star Wars to be a cult classic. Is it? Is it not? I really want to hear what you're thinking.
Well, that again, I think it's a really tough one. I think as you start getting to bigger series like that, you think of Star Wars, you think of Harry Potter, you think of Lord of the Rings, you think of all these things that they do have a following, and it is very similar in aspects to cult classics followings,
right?
But it still branches more. I guess it's the mainstream.
Right.
It's
but using your own definition, saying that it had
tough.
an impact on society. Star Wars had a huge impact on society
and culture.
And culture. Heck, in the 80s, you had President Ronald Reagan saying, "We've got a Death Star. We're gonna."
And so, but yeah, absolutely. By that definition, it is. I think it's just the internal struggle of there are certain things that you want to say are too big for it. Like that is different than I don't know. It's a different level of success that came with Star Wars.
Right.
That became so ingrained in culture that it's like, well, yeah, that makes sense that it got ingrained in culture
Yes.
versus a blockbuster hit that didn't have sequels, didn't have a series off of it, but became ingrained in culture.
Okay, so based off of that, Mean Girls does have sequels, and it's got it's got other things attached to it. But
It does have sequels?
Yes, there's a second
What?
Mean Girls movie.
No, there's
Yes,
not.
there is. I think there's like 2 more or something like that.
But we don't talk about bad sequels like Grease 2. Nobody.
I actually liked Grease too. I don't know what it. Yeah.
Really?
Oh
Really?
yeah, I
Oh my
didn't.
God.
I'm not gonna say it was better
must
than
be
the
for the
first
young
one.
ones.
definitely
but
not.
It must be for the youngins, Rich.
Yeah, I
don't
guess so.
understand.
Maybe I just
you
have
know.
a better movie taste. I don't know, guys.
No, I just think it's a weird balance on that. I think there are some. Yes, by my definition, obviously it has an effect on culture. I think there's always that part of you that says when something, like what you were saying, when something is too mainstream is when it becomes maybe
I think
not
when
in that category.
when it jumps out of pocket, like right off the bat, mainstream.
And I would say that Star Wars is one of those that literally.
I think
It
it's
depends.
become
It
one
depends
of
which
those.
Star Wars
immediately.
movie. It depends
I
which
think
Star
it
Wars movie, because
became
the
that.
very first Star Wars movie did not do well in box offices on its opening weekend or its first month. I
No.
mean, you can watch all the documentaries about it, and that's like
Right.
their very first point. And it wasn't until they kind of picked up a toy deal where they actually
Right.
started picking up traction and getting noticed.
That and Empire, that's when it really skyrocketed, because Empire, to me, is the greatest sequel of all time.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think there's...
So let me
that
ask-
and maybe, Godfather Part 2.
So I would say maybe like the first one, maybe even the second one would be considered cult classics, but then from there on it becomes
It just became a
becomes
franchise.
nostalgic, and then
Yeah.
it becomes a franchise.
The other thing too to think about is that the Star Wars originated from books, just like Harry Potter did too. So like, would you consider something a cult classic? It's not really a cult classic movie, I guess, if the
Well, Star Wars was a movie first. It'd just be,
they wrote books after the
they wrote
first
the books.
movie to kind of
I thought
add
the books
layers
came
to it.
before.
Oh, no. Well, now they come before.
No,
but
I thought the books were written before the
No.
first movie.
No, George Lucas wrote it all on like a notepad, basically, and then somebody ended up actually penning out.
Because like Harry Potter, would you
yes.
consider Harry Potter a cult classic?
I would say that would be more nostalgic than
Yeah. I would say that it's nostalgic for me because I was a kid when the books first came out, so I was able to read the books first along with literally everyone else I knew, even like my parents and other friends' parents, and then I got to see the movies and get to see them like create this story that I grew up reading and turn it into something I can actually watch and visualize. So for me, I would say it's more nostalgic based on the fact that I grew up with the series. But that's different.
But
because
does it make it less of a cult? Because there's still conventions for Harry Potter. There's still people that live like.
I feel like they have a.
See, it's tough because it's like, at what point does it become a cult classic?
Okay,
because
I would say the first one, yes. This is kind of my basis. If the first one's good enough to create a series, then the first one should be exclusively held to a cult classic standard. Because
Okay.
then, the other ones kind of outdo the first Harry Potter movie,
Sure.
obviously, with like visuals and
of
character
course,
writing and development.
And there's a lot of things that can probably be released initially that aren't cult classics to begin with, but become cult classics as people have that nostalgia for it.
Exactly.
I think nostalgia and cult classics actually go kind of hand in hand.
I think in a way, yes.
People long for that first time they watched it with friends or the experiences that they had with it. So I think that's what brings it back for people.
Oh, yeah.
I think it also depends on the movie, because I could tell you my wife would not consider this movie as, nostalgic. Because she would not want to watch it.
yeah.
She doesn't
She
want to
wouldn't
watch
want to
it.
reminisce on it.
No, she doesn't.
Yeah.
She doesn't.
But
She
then-
watched it for the first time on Halloween, and then she was like, I don't want to watch that movie ever again. It was too weird.
But then you have things like, as I brought, like Zoolander here.
Oh,
Zoolander
cult classic
is
all the
all the
way.
way.
It is a
All the
cult
way.
classic, and it's also nostalgic. I think for me,
Yes,
I grew
I
up
agree.
Zoolander. I can quote it almost every line to that movie.
Right.
It's such a smart movie, despite it being super dumb.
I know.
if
I
that makes
watched it the
sense.
other night, and it's so funny.
And then Zoolander 2, the fact that they came out with that like 10 years, 20 years later, whatever it was, like
Right.
that it still had that impact on people. So that's why I say nostalgia and cult classics kind of go hand in hand. I think that nostalgia can drive something to become a cult classic. I don't necessarily think that it's always the case that something that's nostalgic is a cult classic, and kind of vice versa.
Well, let's take a look at some of these other ones you have here. So you have Fifth Element here.
Fifth Element, yes. So Fifth Element is another weird one where it's a smaller group of people that have seen the movie. I know I introduced this movie to my friend David not too long ago. It was harder for him to watch it. The first part of the
Sure.
movie is a little slow and it takes a second, but there are a lot of quotable lines, a lot of good characters in it. Multipass is a huge one on there. You got
I mean, personally,
Rod.
I've never seen the movie, and I already know the iconic red bob and the white outfit is from that movie specifically.
Right.
And who I think is it Chris Rock that's in it?
Chris
Or
Tucker.
Chris
Chris
Tucker.
Tucker.
Yeah.
Ruby Rod.
I know his character.
Oh, yeah.
And I've never once sat down and tried to watch this
But you-
movie.
It's so good.
But you know it.
I know
you
it, yes, and I feel like a lot of that can kind of fall on the nostalgic part of it, you know? Like, I see a lot
Yeah.
of it more on the social media side of things versus seeing it, like, on actual, like, TV and all that stuff.
Well, and this gives me the same vibes as like Demolition Man. Demolition Man is another one
Yeah.
that is
Or-
very nostalgic, but also kind of cult classic-y,
Right.
where like,
Or in the same kind of genre, Blade Runner.
Blade. Okay, yeah.
Blade
yeah.
Runner, I would say, is a cult classic, like big time. How many different versions of that movie has come
2.
up? There's like 4 of them.
No, there's only
No,
No,
there's
you're
like-
thinking Blade.
yeah, you're
What'd I
thinking,
say?
Blade. You said Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Yeah, Blade Runner.
No, Blade is
No,
different.
There's-
Blade
okay,
Runner
there's different
Okay.
has like
versions.
it has like the original version, but then it has like the director's,
director's cut.
and then
Oh.
the
But
But
director's
it's
cut,
still
and then,
the
and
same
then,
the same
movie.
I know.
We're
but
getting
it
to
doesn't-
Zack Schneider
I
cuts
will
now.
say,
Yeah,
I will
I
say
know,
Blade
but-
Runner I would consider that a cult classic.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Based off of how the first one went,
Yeah.
It wasn't like a super high-end, super, well-expected movie. It was Harrison Ford's, like, one of his first big roles that kind of took him out. So, yeah, I would consider Blade Runner to be a cult classic, especially even, like, the director's cut and that they have so many different types of versions of it, and even the new one.
It's so difficult to find like different versions. Like, what is the actual version of the movie now? Like nowadays, you don't.
Is he real or is he a replica?
It-
They both say something
Right,
different.
exactly. It's crazy. Quite a following.
Yeah.
Quite a following. Princess Bride.
Nostalgic for me,
Princess
at
Bride.
least.
Princess
Yeah.
Bride, I think, is definitely cult following. I would branch that in there. I think the
I would
famous.
say a little bit of both.
It's a little bit
Because
of both.
It's nostalgic for me, but yeah.
But
like,
again, nostalgia can lead to cult classic.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows the famous line, I'm Ego Montoya, you killed my father, prepare to die.
Absolutely.
See, everybody. So
It's
it has that
inconceivable.
it has that impact. You've seen it on other shows. You've seen people use those same lines. So I think that one's a little more of a niche cult
Okay.
following. I don't think it's as big as a Mean Girls or a Rocky Horror Picture Show, but I
Right.
do think it is a cult.
Well, because we were in this season, another, I would say, probably cult following, or is it nostalgia? It's a Wonderful Life, because it did horrible when it first came out. In what was it, the 40s or something like that when it came out. But then now it's
Yeah.
everybody
Now it's a
watches
classic.
it. Yeah. It's okay. Maybe it's a classic.
Yeah,
maybe
it's like
not.
a classic Christmas movie.
Yeah,
Because,
maybe-
I mean,
And then there's a difference between it being a classic versus a cult classic.
classic.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would
so maybe
say-
it's more of a classic than a cult.
Yeah, because I don't
following.
know anyone who's like all year round. It's a Wonderful Life, hardcore, like conventions.
Every time I hear a bell rings, I know that an angel gets its wings. Come on.
Oh, that is in that movie. So I feel like maybe it didn't do so well when it first came out because it is a very depressing movie. And things were already really depressing then.
You know,
And
true.
it's like, who really wants to,
Reminisce about the
around Christmas time when it's supposed to be happy and it's like about a guy getting ready to like take his life. Like, I can understand why it didn't do so well at first, but now looking back, it's like, oh, you look at it with a different point of view now, like with gratitude and thankfulness and appreciation.
And I think when you start talking about movies that are around the holidays, it's tricky to define it as a cult classic because it's just widely accepted that you watch these movies around the holidays. So, How the Grinch Stole Christmas.
That is true. I don't watch it in July.
Nightmare Before Christmas.
Unless my kids are
Actually,
watching.
Hocus
no,
Pocus.
Nightmare Before Christmas is 2 holidays, Halloween and
Well, yes,
Actually,
but
you
you
know what?
only typically watch it during that time.
Nightmare
Most
Before-
people
I
don't
guess-
watch it.
I would say
Nightmare Before Christmas has a huge cult following.
I would
Disneyland
agree.
has all year round stuff for it. Like people have
Well, that's 'cause
tattoos.
Disney.
They have like cars, car
Yeah.
decals, clothing.
I just
Hot
don't.
Topic
I see
sells
people
stuff.
more excited, and you see more of it during the holiday that it actually represents.
I
which
guess,
is what I'm
yeah.
talking
True.
about. So like Hocus Pocus, same thing. Everybody starts talking about Hocus Pocus,
But it's a Halloween
in
classic.
Halloween.
You
It's a
know?
Halloween classic.
Yes, it's a
Is it
Halloween
a cult classic? Is it both? Is it like so? At what point do you define like holiday classics
Yeah.
versus cult classics?
I feel like Christmas movies are different though because it's really hard to have a cult following for a Christmas movie, except if it's like Die Hard or something.
Right, which we're talking about next week. So, let us know in the comments. We're going to put polls out there and stuff. We want to get some feelers. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie or is it not? And we want to see what you say about it, and we're going to talk about it next week. This will be fun.
yes, it's
Actually, there's a whole
Interesting.
cult following just around that idea. Not just the movie itself, but
whether or not
whether
the
or not
controversy
it's
of
a,
it.
it's a Christmas movie or
Going
not,
back to
you
the
know?
controversy of it all.
Yeah, so that'll be fun to talk about. But
Yeah.
cult classics, man. So,
Well, we got a few more down here. We
Yeah,
had
we do.
Office Space.
Office Space, yep.
Office Space, I would say, is definitely a cult classic. Anybody who's worked in an office environment, this and Waiting, those 2 movies, if you've worked in a restaurant, you know these movies. You can quote them every day. You know what it's like. It's relatable to everybody.
Once again, I've never seen Office Space, but I know all the classic tropes from it, like the
Right.
printer scene, or like when he's in his car and he's like rapping and a black guy comes up and he locks the car door. Like I know all those, and like the red stapler, I get all of it, but I don't take interest in seeing it because I know all of those things already.
And maybe that's how we define a cult classic, is when it extends beyond even those who've watched it.
Yeah.
Well, I think it becomes even easier to make cult classics nowadays because of the meme generation. Because we just make memes out of it. Literally,
look at The Room.
right? We make oh hi Mark. Yes, exactly. Okay, so having that in mind, then talking about that, so would a lot of the Will Ferrell movies be cult classics, like Anchorman, like Ricky Bobby, like
I don't think so because just about anyone can quote those. Even my mom can.
But it's had an impact.
It
It's
has an
branching again,
impact.
but I also
It's-
think, I don't know. It's tough because it's like,
well,
And
even
they were so
even
well
if,
received.
yes, but even if somebody's never seen Anchorman, which I do know some people who haven't seen it, they know some of the quotes and the mustache and the tropes from that too,
Well,
or
yeah,
even
because
Ricky
it was
Bobby.
just I feel like they know that because it was just so successful right out the gate that it's just
Yeah,
social
okay.
media just became
Sure,
flooded with
sure.
like clips from the movie and
well, and that's another
quotes and
topic.
stuff.
Is there a point in time where, because social media is here, that we've had to change the definition of what is a cult classic?
Maybe.
yeah, I guess I would kind
Based on
of
how
consider for me, if it's gonna be like a comedic cult classic, you're gonna have to talk about like Happy Gilmore, Billy Madison, like the
Okay.
Adam Sandler movies that actually
Sure.
just were just. It was like
Groundhog's Day.
50-50 back then.
Groundhog's Day.
Groundhog's
Yes.
Day, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's tough. I think as technology and as social media and everything has changed, I think it is easier to get a movie to influence social regular means
If
of
you
the
do it
world.
right.
If you do it right. So I think that maybe that portion we'd have to look through a different lens at this point.
Yeah.
Of saying just because somebody can quote a movie in most recent years, if it's come out in the last 10 years, that makes sense just because they're more exposed to it.
Sure. Okay.
Versus
Interesting
versus
thought,
back in the day when there wasn't Facebook and memes every 2 seconds.
And you only knew about
and it
that
still
movie.
made an influence based on word of mouth, that would be more of the cult classic aspect.
Well, another cult classic that not a whole lot of people really consider cult classic, but I didn't even know that this even existed until I watched the documentary about I think it's still on Netflix, about these 3 guys who made a shot-by-shot remake of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
Are you talking? It's not those kids, right? The Wolfpack. No, they did Quentin Tarantino movies.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Scratch that.
Yeah, no,
Ignore
like
me.
these guys spent like almost 30 years, off and on making a shot-by-shot remake of Raiders.
Well, was it good?
Yes and no. Like they
Is
started...
that a cult classic, or is that just crazy people
Is
trying
that
to do a
is
project?
that like
No,
Neil Green status?
Well, if you watch the documentary, and this is the documentary actually revolves around them trying to get the final shot of the movie. They had it done in like the 80s, 90s, early 90s, something like that. But the only shot that they did not put in the movie was the plane scene, because how are they going to do a whole plane scene? They were basically kids and teenagers that were making these a lot of it was just handmade. Like the big rolling boulder was like tinfoil wrapped up 1,100 times, and they were just it was bad, but it wasn't horrible either. Like it was good, but it wasn't necessarily bad. But it became this like they made it for fun. They had it on some VHS tapes. They handed it out to friends, and then it just like went away for like years and years and years. And then all of a sudden, fast forward to 2002, 2003, when The Two Towers was getting ready to come out. There was some obscure film festival going on, and they were showing a bunch of nostalgic video movies, some cult classic movies, and leading up to the premiere of The Two Towers. They were going to watch it, before anybody else in the world. They were going to watch it like the day before, but they had to have a certain time to do it. Well, there was some time there that they needed to put something in, and the guy who was leading the film festival didn't know what to do, and his friend was like, you know what, just put this on, and then everybody like freaked out about it. They thought it was amazing. It's not a great movie, but they thought it was amazing that they shot for shot remake of this, and they were actually more upset about turning that off to watch the brand new Lord of the Rings movie. And like it exploded after that. Like a huge following happened. Steven Spielberg even saw it and said, "These guys are great." They met the guys. It was.
Well, I would say the fact that it shocked people that they were doing a shot-by-shot remake.
Yeah,
but it's
being played all over the country now in film festivals.
I think that would make it not a cult classic because it didn't shock anybody that people were remaking Star Wars.
Sure. Okay. Sure.
Star Wars, everybody was doing that. Whereas if it's out of the ordinary for somebody to be imitating your movie, then I would not say that it's. I would say that it's not a cult classic.
I don't know a lot of people that reenact.
Maybe a cult following, maybe.
Cult following, yeah. But again, that goes back to, is it a fandom versus a cult following? Like, what branch is that
I
difference?
consider fandoms and cult followings the exact same thing in my opinion.
Interesting. So you would consider it kind of a like an independent film cult classic?
Yeah, absolutely. I consider anything that's actually like independent indie kind of film to be a cult classic if it develops that type of following, because it is still a cult following, whether it's a big cult classic or not.
I would love to actually see it, and watch it, and just kind of, because I saw the documentary and I thought I was very impressed by it, and so it was, this would be interesting.
Yeah, I feel like cult classics, there's so many different elements to it, so many different things to consider that could make it a cult classic, that it's just kind of all based on opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, with that, let us know what you think about cult classics. So let us know some of your favorite cult classics in the comments below. And all that. Next week, it's Christmas, you know, so Merry Christmas to any of those who celebrate it. Mm-hmm. But we are going to be talking about Die Hard. Is Die Hard not just a cult classic, but is it a Christmas cult classic? Is it a Christmas movie? Yes or no? One says yes, one says no. Find out next week.
The other's neutral because they've never seen it.
Find out next week. We're going to throw it down here in our weird
You're in the Vibe Studio.
Right here in the Vibe Studio. Sundays. No. Friday.
Come on.
There it is. Sorry. Yeah.
Subscribe, follow, all the usual.
Absolutely.
Click your life away. Hit that bell.
Please
we're
do.
here every week. Please support us if you like this.
And thank you again for joining us. And if you are following us, thank you. If it's your first time, welcome. Welcome to our insane craziness.
We're sorry.
Yes. Well, are we though? But
I'm sorry.
Yes. Well, with that, keep vibing.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us and talking about cult classics. Let us know in the comments below what some of your favorite cult classic movies are. Also, be sure to hit that like button and follow and subscribe to know when we drop the latest episode every Friday, plus new content coming very soon to this channel. Next week, it'll be Christmas. And yes, we do have an episode coming out. And yes, we will be talking about Die Hard. Now, leading up to the episode, we want to know from you, is it a Christmas movie? Is it not? That's what we're going to be debating tomorrow. So tune in here next week for that and check that episode out. And thank you for subscribing and supporting this channel. And as always, keep creating, build your brand, and go out there and tell your story.